My name's Dan. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Cinchy. So welcome to the learning series. As you may already know, we run these sessions every other week, and all sessions are recorded. So you are able to access them on demand if you visit cinchy.tv. Not only this episode, but all past episodes going back to season 1, where we started back in September of last year. So we encourage you to check out any past episodes if you missed any, and feel free to share any ones that you found particularly insightful amongst your peer group. So today we're going to be covering best practices for how to transform your organization to become data-centric. And joining me today is Fatima Kaba, who heads up change management and training here at Cinchy. Fatima, please introduce yourself and feel free to share any dirty secrets. I promise that we won't tell anyone.
Of course you won't. So hi, everyone. My name is Fatima Kaba. I'm the Director of Training and Development and Change Management here at Cinchy. I have been at Cinchy for just over a year now, and I've spent the last 2 decades of my career in training and development and change management. So really my focus here at Cinchy is to help organizations that have already made the decision to move towards a data-centric organization, really help them with that transition. So to really help, reduce the risk, with the least amount of cost and the most amount of benefit.
Yes, and I heard a rumor, Fatima.
Oh dear.
That you indeed do love change.
You know what? I have to say, I do love change.
Yes.
I do. I like helping people go through change. I'm not sure if I love it myself as an individual.
Right.
So, of course, working at Cinchy, I totally know what it is to be data-centric. But I think, Dan, why don't you kind of tell me what you think it is first, and I'll let you know if you got it right or not.
All right, sounds good. All right, so the quick refresher, if anyone's joining us for the first time. So for 40 odd years, we've lived in an app-centric world where there's an app for everything and a database for every application, and you do this wacky thing called integration. Point to point, 500 apps is 500 silos, and in a data-centric architecture, it's flipping the role of data and applications on its head, essentially doing what the central power grid did for power, so that the buildings can simply hook into the grid. In this case, the buildings are the applications, and they don't manage their own data. They connect to the grid. That grid is the data fabric or data mesh, depending on your term of choice, and there's nuances between that, but fundamentally, that's what data-centric is where data is truly at the center. It's not in the center of an application. It's in the center of the organization as its own product. It is the application. So here, 500 apps is 0 integration, 0 silos. If you look at the difference here, Appcentric means that you are doing this thing called data integration over APIs and ETLs, and generally spending half of the IT budget every year moving data around. What you're trying to do in this model is become data-driven, just like how your fingers and toes listen to your central brain. They are under the control of the data. That's the old way of thinking. This is how it's operated for many, many, many decades. And on-prem cloud doesn't really fundamentally change that. Whereas the move towards data-centricity replaces integration with collaboration, where we've seen other examples of collaboration transforming the enterprise, but it's data collaboration, not integration. And instead of being driven by data, it's driven by intelligence using a collaborative intelligence model. So we cover these concepts in far more depth in past sessions. So for anyone that is not familiar with these, feel free to check those out. That's it in a nutshell. How did I do?
You know what? Not too shabby, but maybe I could have done a little bit better.
Okay.
So, what I find interesting, Dan, is in the context of, data centricity, this really reminds me of, things that have happened in the past, right? And I think it's important to learn from the past. So when we look at this, the concept of data centricity and moving towards a more data centric model, from a past experience perspective, when we moved from, waterfall to agile, we found that there was a lot of, change that happened. Things didn't go perfectly. There were wins and losses, and, we made mistakes, and organizations had wins and failures that we learned from those wins and failures. And I think the really big key takeaways are that this is not an overnight change. This is not something that we're going to nail the very first time. This is going to take time. It's going to take effort, and it's going to take a lot of, sweat equity to kind of get where you want to go. So, that's some of my thoughts around kind of, just from a change perspective, learning from what we've seen in the past when we moved from waterfall to agile, and now moving into something new like data centricity, what we can, kind of expect along the way.
Right. I remember when I was working at some of the banks, this is going back a while, I didn't want to date myself, but it was about 20 odd years ago. So I've dated myself, but when Agile was new and exciting and organizations were all in, and they went, some organizations went too far, too fast and furious, and went too slow. Some it was just right. But I remember there was so much confusion where it was not that uncommon for teams to use agile as an excuse for basically poor practices, and sometimes they were able to get away with that. But I've seen, that is definitely resonating with me, because I've seen that firsthand around the mass amount of confusion that can happen as organizations are doing that. But ultimately, like most organizations these days don't follow waterfall methods, they follow agile. So somehow, in spite of the little failures, there was lessons learned, and they continued to push on. And I think that's the key.
I would have to agree. And I think change is a big part of that, and accepting change and really kind of taking it in stride, right? And, organizational change management, it's a discipline all to itself. It's got methodologies and frameworks, best practices and books. There's loads of knowledge around this topic as a whole. And this is really complementary to everything that we do, right? These are just a handful of different organizational change management models that are out there, from a discipline perspective. So there's things like the Lewin's change management model that really talks about, unfreezing the processes that you have, doing a thorough postmortem of what those are, and really changing them to work for what you needed to, and then refreezing them. Whereas the McKinsey 7S model goes over things like strategy and the people you have. And there's a lot of commonalities between all of these different change approaches that are out in the marketplace from a discipline perspective, but they do really all have one commonality, and it's really to help people usher through what can be very uncomfortable at times, which is change. Be it from a business perspective, we've all had to change, or even personally, we know how uncomfortable and awkward change can be. So these are really just there to act as a blueprint or a pathway to help guide you through those difficult processes and those changes that we have to go through, regardless of where we are in our careers or our lives.
And one of the things that I've just noticed when there has been organizational change at some of the places that I've been is there's always a catalyst. There's someone who initially is that spark that champions that change, and they have to do a lot of selling internally. I've been there myself, and I've seen others do that, and it's hard. Not everyone is that early adopter, that change agent. Maybe it's 5% of the workforce. It's not 100%. That's for sure. But when you look at these methodologies, I know you have knowledge of each of these, but is there any that are particularly relevant and helpful when we think of data-centric specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if I was to kind of take a step back and kind of look at them all holistically, I would say, yes, I could probably leverage bits and pieces from all of these different, frameworks, but I would say kind of as a blueprint or a pathway to kind of guide mentally or make a mental model of just how to go through the data-centric change process. I like the ADKAR model, right? It's simple, it's straightforward, and it takes you through 5 basic stages and goals that are attainable and achievable throughout a change process. So it's really about kind of walking through these 5 stages through your journey, which starts with awareness. Awareness is finding out about what it is that topic is all about. So really finding out what is data centricity. Then really after having that awareness, it's about, do you want to do it? Are you on board and having that drive to do it? Then it's about knowledge, or kind of gaining information about how that change is to occur. How do you achieve it? Then really taking that knowledge and converting that into something that's actionable, which is really about skills and abilities, and really taking that knowledge and making it practical and implementing that in whatever way is required to achieve, and execute that knowledge, and then really just reinforcing it, right? So, how are you going through the process of continual change and improvement? How are you managing and governing your processes and your change that's occurring from a data centricity perspective? And, what we'll do is we'll go through each of these, stages in detail and talk about them with regards to, how or what it means to be data centric in each one of these areas, or each one of these stages or goals.
All right, excellent. So first stage.
The first stage. The first stage is awareness. And sometimes, even before you start being aware, there's a process of learning about what it is to even begin with. A lot of people won't start off with the knowledge of, there's this thing called data centricity out there. What is data centricity? So it's really about, figuring out, what does this really mean in the context of, this new concept that's out there. So we all have this idea of being data driven, right? So, this has been around for ages, decades even, to have this concept of having a data driven organization, and making the shift from being data driven to data centric. It can take time, it'll take work. There's going to be potentially individuals who have awareness of what it means to be data centric, or to have a data centric organization, but choose not to go down that path, and that's okay. But for those that are, kind of making that transition, there is really an aha moment that you go through when you're working through, the deltas or the differences between being data driven versus, kind of moving down that data centric path. Right. And not everyone will get there. And, if you are one of those who are, early adopters, and, you are a change agent, then moving down this path will feel natural for you. And if it's not, it can be, like all change processes, challenging at times.
Right, and not everyone, just to reinforce that, not everyone takes the red pill. Not everyone is even presented with the choice to have the blue versus the red pill, and that's a real reflection of how it works in the real world, for sure. And interestingly, considering myself to be someone who does like to bring change at organizations, I tend to get bored if things aren't changing, so I like to introduce change, not for the sake of it, but to move things along. Once you take that red pill and have, start to go beyond awareness, is you find that you have to convince others to take the red pill. And that's where you really need backup. You need information, you need knowledge, you need sharing. You can't just, that's where you need help, basically, to facilitate that.
Absolutely. And that's, the whole thing about information is really key. There's a lot of information out there. There are tons of resources with regards to books and webinars and conferences. And even if you just Google data centric, on the internet, you're going to find loads and loads of information. And I think this is kind of where a word of caution comes in with regards to information in general, right? There is a lot of data out there, and it's really up to us as individuals to discern what is true in fact for us versus what isn't. Even coming from the vendor perspective, vendors will have their own perspective of the truth, as will analysts and how they present what is truth for them. So it's really about you as individuals sifting through all of the knowledge and the information that you have access to that's out there, and really determining for yourselves, is this the right path for you? And if it is, what is real in this, plethora of knowledge and information that's out there, right? So that's something that you as individuals need to take ownership of with regards to the information out there, because not all of it will be true. Not all of it will be factual. A lot of, organizations, a lot of vendors, have this concept of data fabric, but is it true data fabric? Is it true data collaboration, that's really up to you as individuals to kind of make that assessment based on the information you have access to.
Yeah, and that's definitely like one of the things that I'll tell folks that we're talking to, even if they're early stage prospects, is don't even take our word for it, because hey, on the Cinchy side, we're a vendor, so vendors there to sell software. So you have to just reach your own conclusions, and we're past the point of PowerPoints and promises working. It needs to be real, so people need to experience it and see it and test it before forming any conclusions. So. And I've seen that so many times through past hype cycles. Like I remember, I don't know, 10 odd years ago, a data lake, where data lake at its core is a simple concept, but then you had vendors convincing senior executives that it's the panacea, it's going to solve all their problems. Little did they know it's a file system to dump copies of data, and then you need to organize it, and that's where the hard part starts. And so there's definitely be cautious, be skeptical. And continue to do that, especially when there's something new. Once things stabilize, then it starts to stabilize. But even today, data fabric versus data mesh network versus integration, everyone has their own spin on this. There's even kind of battles amongst thought leaders around who created what term and what the concepts actually mean and how they're different. But you talk to 10 people, you're going to get 15 explanations of that. Form your own conclusions, but be curious, do research, because there's definitely something real behind this. But the truth is never from a single source. It's the aggregate of that. So but then once you move past that awareness stage, then on to.
Exactly. It's really about desire. So just because you have, awareness, that doesn't mean that you necessarily have the drive or the desire to move forward with that awareness, right? So it's really about, why should we become data centric, or why should my organization take on this, new way of life, so to speak, right? And there's loads of benefits that come along with being data centric. Everything from cost savings around point-to-point integrations, lower development time and cycles, to business enablement, where your business users have more of a self-service and a more data collaborative environment to work in, to things like control automation and collaborative insights, right? So there's a lot of great reasons as to why you should make the shift towards being more data centric. But just being aware that just because you have awareness in general, that doesn't mean you necessarily will get on the train and move down that pathway.
Yeah, and I'd say also, just because there's a potential benefit doesn't mean that benefit is ultra relevant to you. So it's, what are the benefits, and do I even care about those benefits? And again, thinking critically about that. And I think that's the key here to, I guess, turning that desire into the next stage, which is knowledge.
Right. And the knowledge is, like we Dan and I just said a few minutes ago, there's tons of information out there. It's really determining what is required. What do you need to know about being data centric? How does it actually work? There is tons of information. If you make your way out onto Cinchy TV, there's loads of resources that we provide, that others provide, that kind of take you through the concepts of, what does it mean to be data centric? So I'm not going to go over this in too much detail, because if you, kind of go back to some of our past learning series, we have, covered this content in a fair amount of detail. But these are things that, again, you as individuals will need to learn about and, make yourself more knowledgeable about, and really kind of gain that understanding. So it's not really just about knowing, these surface six things, data as a network, zero integration, metadata driven, experiences. It's really understanding what is behind each one of these components, and really truly understanding that. And also really getting to understand, what does a data-centric architecture even look like? And really kind of getting around that concept as well. There's also, design patterns, right? These data-centric design patterns. These patterns are really just, ways in which we can easily kind of, find ways to implement these changes that we're going through. So it's just a helpful way to kind of manage through and kind of look through, well, how can we actually facilitate these changes? That takes us to, our data-centric blueprints as well. So really understanding from an architecture perspective, a design pattern perspective, a blueprint perspective, what do all of these individual components mean individually, and how do they work together collaboratively to make up this world called data centricity that we're working through and towards?
Yeah, and then coming back to the word of caution, the content that we have on Cinchy TV, again, look at that as a source, not your only source, because there are differing views on some of these concepts, especially when you get into the details and guts. So you definitely want to, before getting too attached to a single tree, you want to take a step back and understand the forest, and then make sure you pick the right tree, if that makes any sense. So encourage people to do that. And as we implied earlier, there's a pretty rapidly growing content, and like even this week, we attended the Data-Centric architecture conference, and there's a growing, I think it was the third year that they've had that, and there's a growing awareness. It is, to me, it feels like people are starting to awaken to this, but it's kind of happening fast and furious. And I think COVID's been a huge accelerator for people recognizing that they need to build all these experiences. And the way to do that, better, faster, cheaper, is to move off of the integration paradigm, the app-centric approach. And I know that there's lots of content, but I would personally recommend these two books in particular, written by Dave McComb, who I believe is a true thought leader in the space. And the second one there, the Data-Centric Revolution, really provides a ton of insight in terms of why one would want to and how one would go about it. And provides, similar to the content that we provide, it's kind of a bit of a blueprint. So this is just an example of another source of knowledge. But then with that knowledge, the next step is ability.
Yeah, and just before we move into ability, for those of you that are interested, in 2 weeks on the 18th of February, we will be having, Dave join Dan on our next learning series. So if you want to hear more about some real life experiences around, this type of transformation, be sure to tune in on the 18th. Okay, so moving into...
sorry, Fatima, I just saw a comment from Ruben that these books are excellent. And I can't stress that enough. So please do read if you have not read them. They're available audio and others, but honestly, it will, if this is still new for you, it may be the catalyst. I know for me, it definitely helped.
For sure, absolutely. So go out and get your copies today, guys. And the next piece is really about ability, right? So again, ability shouldn't be confused with knowledge. They are two completely and unique and distinct things, right? So ability is really, what are the skills and the tools that you need to actually execute, where knowledge is having that understanding of what it is that you need to do. This is the actual execution. So what are the types of skills and the people and the roles that you are going to need to help make this data-centric transformation occur within your organization? So who are the individuals? What skills do they need? You're going to need things like builders, and you're going to need individuals who are responsible for, governance, and, having these individuals within, your organization is wonderful. But if for whatever reason these skills don't exist internally, that's not something to be ignored. If the skills don't exist, there's multiple ways of acquiring those skills. You can up level your skills or the skills within your organization or within those teams that are going to be part of the transformation. You can bring others from other areas within the organization into your teams if they're not in those teams currently, or you can always outsource those skill sets as well. So, don't be afraid if those skills don't exist within those, a data-centric framework. There's always ways of achieving that, and not to ignore it.
Yeah, and Fatima, definitely this is important, and recognizing that you're not going to you need to, in order to do this, you need to leverage the people that you already have. So it's 99% an exercise of mapping people, what they do today and what they would do in this new world. And if you play your cards right, then it will actually play to the strengths of the individuals, because the type of work that still needs to get done, it's still the same work. It's just organizing that work differently. The only exception to that is the ability to enable now universal governance. And there's some other considerations where today people in governance roles it's like paper governance, because you don't have control. You have policies and procedures, but you're not in control. Whereas these new technologies with data centricity actually give you that control. So that's where you start to see some real world impacts to not just the organization, but even what people do and how they do that. Realizing that we're running a bit short on time, yeah. I think the key here is that people don't look at snapping their fingers and suddenly the elephant is eaten, meaning they're now data centric. So it's where I've seen success is where people are identifying a scope of the organization and getting started and basically measuring to make sure that they're getting a real world value, because this isn't about an investment where you should expect a cost and a consequence for a future good. No, there should be a continuous good, a continuous acceleration. And if not, then course correct. But it's better to learn that lesson at a smaller scale than it is if you're trying to swallow the entire elephant. And one of the other keys here is the shift away from apps as your backlog to business capabilities as your backlog, which is a different way of organizing. If you think of Agile, where you're organizing product backlog, well, a product is an app. What is the boundaries of an app? It's loosely linked to business, but not really. Whereas here, it's a lot more like a domain centric. It's very centered around the business and the capabilities of that business and the data that is ultimately owned by that business. And there is a lot of, there's other organizations that have a lot of best practices on producing business capability maps and thinking about business architecture, because the way that you architect and design in a data-centric and domain-driven world is very much starting to move towards convergence with business architecture. So the evaluation against maturity models, there's lots of tools and tricks and techniques out there to help with that. But the final step there in terms of reinforcement and realizing that it's 12. So for anyone who has any questions, if they have any, we're happy to stay on for a good 5-10 minutes after the end of this. So please do feel free to stay behind, and we'll make sure that any questions are answered.
Yeah.
But reinforcement.
Yeah, so just to quickly wrap up the reinforcement piece. So like Dan mentioned just a couple of slides ago, it's really about taking a phased approach and, really reinforcing the things that have gone well, what lessons you've learned, things that have gone well to kind of repeat those and, course correct and modify where required. So that's really what this reinforcement stage is about, is to really sit down and evaluate, where have we come from, where are we today, how did we get there, and what can we do to improve and continually improve in this process of making our way to a data-centric world.
Yeah, and maybe just one quick summary point is for organizations that are in the awareness stage, is it starts with that change champion. And what I would say is, if you don't have that champion, then you're probably going to struggle to be successful. So one thing to consider is to ensure that there are at least one champion for whatever the scope is for your initial phase, and empower them to kind of help facilitate the organizational journey through these 5 stages. And it all starts with that change agent, that champion. And without that, you're not going to go very far. So that's it for today's session. So thank you very much, Fatima.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
Yes. And did you share any dirty secrets? I'm trying to remember. For next week,
on the 18th, I'll divulge a thing or two.
All right, that sounds good.
So please come back on the 18th to hear a dirty secret.
Yes. And not only will you hear dirty secrets, we'll also be joined by Dave, who we talked about earlier, and he's going to share some kind of stories from the field. So as a pioneer in the space, he's been helping organizations facilitate that transformation, and has some good war stories to share with us. So I'm personally really excited about that. And then following that on the 25th, we're going to be joined by Kevin and Dan, so we'll have two Dans from Catalyst.Earth, and talking about some really cool work around leveraging data-centric technologies for geospatial. And this is going to be really fascinating if anyone's interested in learning more about geospatial and its relevance to data fabric and data mesh and kind of that synergy there. But that's it for today. If anyone wants to have a deeper dive session on any of the topics, just visit us at cinchy.com/dive deeper. And otherwise, thank you very much.